Data onboarding has been a time-consuming and manual process for too long. Between spreadsheet templates, writing custom scripts, and implementation services, getting data from a customer into your software takes a long time and costs a lot of money. It's a critical manual step in your customer's onboarding process, with no easy way to get it done. Until now. Flat File Concierge automatically converts, validates, and maps all of your data into the specific format you need. In just a few clicks, your data goes from messy and unorganized to validated and ready to use. All with no code required, so you'll be set up in minutes. Need to collaborate with your customer? Don't email sensitive data back and forth. Flat File Concierge lets you invite your customer to a secure, real-time shared workspace. Now you can give your customers a seamless data onboarding experience and save hours doing it. Join the hundreds of businesses who use Flat File to solve their data chaos and are focused on creating long-term value for their customers and their business. Start your free trial now.
Hello and welcome or welcome back to the Customer Success Festival. I hope you're enjoying today's presentations. Just a quick reminder that you can join fellow attendees in our Slack community. Just follow the link at the top of the event website. And now, on to our next speaker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ankur Patel, and I'm a customer success leader at Celonis, the global leader in process mining and process execution management. Today, I'm going to talk to you all about driving adoption in what seems to be a constantly changing SaaS landscape. But before I do, I wanted to take a couple of minutes here to go over a brief history lesson to lay the groundwork on how we are where we are today. Software is eating the world. Mark Andreessen said this in 2011 when Hewlett-Packard, where he was a board member, was contemplating spinning off many of its hardware businesses and instead investing further in software. He went on to say that we are in the middle of a dramatic and broad technological and economic shift in which software companies are poised to take over large swaths of the economy. And boy, was he right. Andreessen's comments were the start of what could arguably be called the greatest technological decade in recent history. Just look at the Amazons and Apples of the world, where they were a decade ago and where they are today. The software plays, the Microsofts, Oracles, ADPs, Salesforces, and many of our own companies are coming, and they're coming fast. Over the next few years, and still continuing today, there's been a further mass shift from enterprises relying on on-premise solution to instead relying on SaaS solutions. Now, I don't want to bore you with what you already know, but I do want to lay the foundation for the core of today's discussion, and that is why adoption is important and how you can successfully drive it. We all know the main drivers and benefits SaaS has over on-premise for both the customer and the vendor. For the customer, it's total cost of ownership that goes down and they get more contractual flexibility. For the vendor, greater lifetime value of a customer. This, however, has also left vendors more susceptible and vulnerable to churn given the customer optionality that subscription businesses create. For that very reason, organizations like all of ours are defining and constantly redefining our customer success frameworks. What makes a customer successful? What makes them healthy and likely to renew and even expand? Is it value realized? Is it adoption? Maybe executive sponsorship coupled with one or both of those? It's likely all of that plus much, much more. It's this, the growth of the subscription economy, that is the single largest driver of customer success teams globally, as seen by the hundreds, if not thousands, of enterprise software companies that have invested heavily in their customer success orgs over the past 5 to 7 years. So let's now finally get to the dreaded 2020, and how that has impacted adoption of SaaS platforms. Can you guys hear me right? I hope you can. So in March 2020, our worlds were rocked. Quarantine kept us away from work and loved ones. Global supply chains turned upside down. Factories were shut, workers furloughed or laid off. Corporations were unable to procure the goods they need to, in turn, create product to sell, creating shortages in things like toilet paper due to hoarding. We all remember those times. Lumber, because people were moving out of cities and building homes. Video games and furniture, because folks wanted to get more comfortable in their homes. This further drove organizations' priorities to shift overnight. and companies that were ill-prepared found themselves immediately contemplating what mattered most: how to operate in the new norm. The world as we knew it changed, and we were all forced overnight into a new normal, one that, frankly speaking, we're still figuring out today. Going back to the corporations, however, Satya Nadella said it best when he called out that we've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. While companies are in fact refocusing their efforts on digital transformation, they're also revisiting existing budgets and what their tech stacks look like, maintaining only the must-have essential softwares. While customer success orgs like yours and mine have always been focused on driving value and adoption for our customers, the need to deliver on this could not ring more true than it does today. The next months and years will separate the nice-to-have softwares from the truly must-have SaaS solutions, because corporations are rationalizing spend. Many are still today preparing for an inevitable recession, and so for that reason, they're examining what the must-haves are. And we all want to fall on the right side of that chasm. There's no stronger metric or KPI which separates a must-have from a nice-to-have than adoption. With that said, let's now dive into what I found are the keys to adoption. Number 1, understand and shape your customer journey. Organizations carefully design customer success journeys early, but don't often objectively review that journey enough to be able to confidently assess whether the customer experience is truly what they aspire it to be. One of the greatest exercises that we've done here at Celonis to really understand our customer journey and how we stack up against the ideal design journey in the last couple of years was a voice of the customer exercise. We spoke to 50 plus enterprise customers of ours about their journey and how various milestones and workshops throughout that journey were reviewed by the customer, what the pain points were, what the challenges, what could have gone better, what went well. We cross-referenced this feedback that we received directly from our customers with usage statistics, identifying key pain points along the way which we could improve upon. Once we had a sound understanding of what this customer journey looked like, we were able to define, as we call it, the moments that mattered in that customer journey, so that we could not only rigorously and religiously execute on these, but also memorialize these as key milestones in that customer journey. Things such as executive onboarding, go lives, value realization, or success stories that were created, user rollouts, and so on. For us, like many of you, one such example of this was executive sponsorship and needing to formalize this for each and every single customer that we have. These executive sponsors are bought into the sales cycle, but often can, fall out after the sales cycle. So making sure that they're engaged early and throughout was one of those key milestones that we wanted to memorialize. Now, I'm not going to go into detail here because exec sponsorship is actually one of the other keys to adoption that I'll be talking about. But the short story is this: you don't know what you don't know. We all design customer journeys to be a certain way, but in reality, it's not exactly as you hoped. Invest the time and effort in speaking to your customers, doing a voice of the customer exercise, for example, to really understand what the journey is and where you can improve. Number 2, make adoption a key company strategy. In today's SaaS marketplace, many organizations are moving to user-based or seat-based pricing models. That said, the single biggest mistake an organization can make as it relates to driving adoption is assuming the sole responsibility of it will fall on the shoulders of CS and customer success only. Ensuring that all parts of the organization are bought into the concept of driving adoption together, essentially making it a core part of your company strategy, is the single best way to tackle adoption. This is, of course, way easier said than done, but CS leaders should make this case internally and make it a priority, if you haven't already done so, to have the entire org focus on driving adoption together. Let me share one example of why this is important. Celonis is a category creator. We are disrupting the way age-old business processes are run. Some of you are the same way that some of you are disrupting a known way of achieving some business outcome with your softwares. Decisions to explore and ultimately buy software are done over very long, drawn-out sales cycles, as we all know, by the likes of executives, often C-level, sometimes VP levels, who are ultimately the economic buyers and the champions who are bringing the software into their organization. Given these extended sales cycles, we wanted to use a small portion of this cycle to extract valuable information that would ultimately lead to faster deployment and adoption, and in turn, accelerate the time to value and success for our customers. For this exact reason, we instilled what are called change management workshops into our pre-sales cycles to ensure that we're getting ahead of the adoption topic, identifying end users of the product even before the software is officially sold. This way, once the software is sold, customer success and professional services have a head start when it comes to identifying end users, aka the beneficiaries of the product, depending on the use cases that are in scope. Now, was this an easy change? Of course not. Absolutely not. It required a strong business case and buy-in from our internal sales leadership and executive management teams. We showed them these abbreviated workshops would ultimately lead to a more rapid deployment and eventually more rapid adoption. This results in a shorter time to value, and here's the kicker, shorter time to upsell, aka new ACV for the sales group. When user adoption becomes a key company strategy, you become customer obsessed.
From my brain. Okay. So hey, I was going to.
Hey, Gemma, sorry, I think you guys aren't on mute.
Because there's a yeah.
Yep, thank you. So when user adoption becomes a key company strategy, you become, customer obsessed, and customer obsession is what leads to world-class retention rates. Customer success becomes a part of your entire organization's DNA as opposed to just a department. When you have all parts of the organization, from solution engineering to sales to customer success, delivery, and customer support, all the way to product and marketing, when you have all of these functions and more embrace user adoption and their role in driving it, it's truly amazing how much you can accomplish and how quickly you can accomplish it. Number 3, and I mentioned it previously before, but an absolute must-have in driving adoption is strong executive sponsorship. Many of us, again, are disrupting some process or technology within our organizations. As I mentioned previously, Celonis is a category creator in that it's changing the way age-old processes are run to be more efficient, intelligent, and frictionless. In order to sell into these customers, we need strong executive sponsors, but we must maintain this relationship and the executive sponsor presence periodically through implementation and eventual rollout. Maintaining some semblance of this top-down push is key, and no better source of that than your executive sponsor or economic buyer, who is essentially a believer or early adopter in bringing this technology into the organization to play that role. Having an executive sponsor isn't always enough. We also need to ensure that we're nurturing and coaching that relationship accordingly. It's important that you do set the cadence for formal health checks in the form of QBRs, for example. This will keep the executive sponsor engaged. Also, setting expectations of the executive sponsor. What role will he or she be playing, during an implementation? As an escalation point, creating top-down push post-implementation when you're driving change management. So align on that change management plan with that executive sponsor. Make sure they're aware of the key role that they'll be playing in creating a top-down push. On the flip side, we should not wait to escalate any roadblocks and challenges. Don't be discouraged also if your executive sponsors are, immediate post-sale excitement waivers over time. Implementations of certain softwares can take time, and that is inevitable, no matter how hard we try. Be afraid to prescriptively coach the executive sponsors on how to communicate. We know our product better than anyone else, so be sure your executive sponsor is coached on the communications. Include your marketing or comms team internally to help with this. We do that often for our go live announcement when our product is implemented and ready to be rolled out to the end users. Number 4, effective onboarding. It's important you onboard new users the right way to keep them engaged. Some would argue that you only get one chance, and if you strike out, you're potentially losing out on that end user. So the 3 key messages that I wanted to send here are to 1, keep user onboarding as prescriptive and simple as possible. For example, have onboarding playbooks or enablement plans. Try to keep the ask of new users as low effort as possible, but also prescriptive as possible. Be thoughtful about who we're onboarding and when. Always look at it from the customer's point of view. What's in it for me? I'll come back to this point on the next keys to driving adoption to talk about this one in more detail. But also think through when to enable technical resources versus business users. Have a plan. Create onboarding hypercare periods. For example, we've hosted weekly office hours for 1 to 2 months post-implementation or after onboarding a new set of users to ensure that they have continued support, and also so we can get feedback on the UX, UI, and assess whether what we've implemented is sticky. Other ways to get creative are to also, create SLAs for the period immediately after an onboarding, informal SLAs, that is, after onboarding new users. For example, 2-hour response times on troubleshooting. We don't want to lose the momentum and the excitement that these new users have coming onto the platform, because if you don't get them to be sticky early, it could lead to significant challenges down the road. Number 5, tie your efforts to larger strategic initiatives. And I can't stress this one enough. So again, going back to the sales cycle, economic buyers and exec sponsors bought this into the organization for some reason, likely a larger strategic challenge or initiative that the organization was facing. It's important to keep this in mind, but also to trickle that down to how and why end users should use the platform, keeping in mind the what's in it for me. Now, let me give you an example. I'm going to use the accounts payable solution many of our customers purchase loans for. From the sales cycle, it's often CFOs or VPs that would care about an accounts payable process and are the ones that are, purchasing this offering. We also know that the strategic initiatives for which they're purchasing Salonis for. But it's important to think about the end user and to ask, again, what's in it for them? In this example, the end user would be an accounts payables clerk. Let's say, her name is Mary or his name is Mark. Mary and Mark have been doing their job, paying vendors one way for 10, maybe 20 years in some cases. Why would Mary want to change the way she's been executing her day-to-day for the last 20 years if there's no benefit in it for her? Well, that's what we need to show. It's one thing to have exec sponsorship and buy-in and the strategic initiative that they bought the software for, but another to show Mary how, she can impact her day-to-day and her KPIs better by also playing into that larger strategic initiative. How can she use Salonis, this new software, not only to achieve, the CFO's strategic initiative, but also to improve her day-to-day and KPIs that impact those larger strategic initiatives? We use value trees like these to define end user persona and how they can benefit from our solution to ultimately impact the larger strategic initiative. And then when you think about this at scale, right? Think about a large organization, payables clerks in this example, there's hundreds, if not thousands of them in some organization, right? And so we want to be able to take this playbook and then roll it out further. Number 6, have a change management plan. I'll keep it high level here, but again, we're disrupting or replacing an organization's way of doing something, their business as usual. To effectively do that, you need a strong, well thought out change management plan. Ensure that you have the right governance structure in place, not just for implementation, but post-implementation adoption and value realization. Think through your enablement plan. When will you enable different types of users? What enablement mechanisms or resources do you have to do this? Have a plan. Define where the product fits within your organization. Who will be the initial users onboarded and when? What does expansion to additional users look like? How can we create a demand pipeline for new potential users or areas of the org to expand to, essentially becoming a revenue generator for your organization? Define your operating model. Is there a CIRCO monthly, biweekly? Is there a health check cadence in place, QBRs or EBRs in place? And finally, underlying all of this is the communication plan. How are we communicating to the org the rollout of this solution? As I mentioned, executive sponsors should be a part of this. Do we have a mechanism to celebrate successes, to drive awareness, celebrate successes, and develop the broader user community within your organization? And this leads to my next point within change management, and that is, how can you drive awareness, celebrate successes, and ultimately build a community? I'll briefly touch on this. So creating awareness, we've done countless things from newsletters, roadshows, company dashboards, to company Facebooks and innovation weeks. On the celebrating successes side, we've had user of the month rewards, awards for improvements on specific KPIs, conference keynotes, success videos that we've done with our customers. And on the establishing a community, lunch and learns, innovation weeks, Slack groups that are created so that you can really start to establish that user community within your organizations. There are so many effective methods to drive awareness, celebrate successes, and to build user communities within your customers. Work together with sales, marketing, and others to get creative in doing so. And finally, number 7, use your data. Continue to adapt. Monitor usage and adoption and continue to have the conversation with your customers where there are dips or downward trends. Instill early warning mechanisms that trigger your CSM when certain thresholds are breached as it relates to adoption. For example, if average DAU drops 25% week over week, or if weekly average usage drops 20% month over month. This will empower you to ask the right questions and have data-driven conversations with your customers. What mattered then may not matter now, because we've seen that in COVID, right? As supply chains were turned upside down, organizations had different priorities than the very next day. Regardless of why your customers bought your product to begin with, COVID, for example, introduced new challenges overnight, and they looked to us, at least, to help solve them. Rather than taking a reactive backseat approach, we introduced a COVID outreach program specifically for our customers during this time, where we proactively reached out to all customers with some of the main challenges we saw our other customers facing as a result of COVID and how we could help them. This required sponsorship from the top in our organization and a joint effort from product, sales, customer success, and services. But most of all, it showed empathy for our customers as we went above and beyond to support them during their most trying times. I'll leave you with a quote from Peter Thiel that sums it up perfectly in my eyes. Customers won't care about any particular technology unless it solves a particular problem in a superior way. So make sure that you always know what the problem is that you're solving, and adoption will come. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. We have a question in the chat. So if you're happy to start with questions, we'll get going.
Sure. Yeah,
Perfect.
Let's do it.
So Fiona has asked, what do you find is the most useful metric when measuring how adoption is affecting renewal rates?
So what do I think is the most useful metric? I'd say there are two metrics, right? One is stickiness, right? So of your users that you're onboarding, how many are actually coming back? Now, not everybody is going to be, a daily user of a product, depending on the product. It could be weekly average usage or monthly average usage, depending on the use case that they're looking at. But stickiness is number one. And then number two is, what does the growth rate look like of these daily average users or weekly average users or monthly average users? So those are the two metrics that I think are the greatest sign of improving health over time as it relates to adoption.
That's great, thank you. So the next question is from Nastasia. They'd like to ask, they'd love to hear more about the key metrics to measure adoption.
Sure, yeah, so, depending on the organization, I would say that if you're selling per user, if you have a per user pricing model, right? One of the best measures of how you're doing to adoption or tracking towards adoption is, what is the consumption looking like of the number of seats or users that you've sold to your customer? So that's kind of our denominator in that case, in that sort of a scenario. But again, I think it depends from one customer to the next on what sort of pricing models that they have. And then again, I'd go back to the two that I mentioned earlier. Is their stickiness in the named users that are logging into your system, and how frequently they're logging in, how long a session lasts, and then also, again, what does the growth rate look like of the overall usage over time?
Makes sense. So Sarah has a question that follows on. How do you get customers who have signed on but never use your product to start using?
Yeah, so what I would look at here is really driving awareness and sharing success stories. So I shared a couple of slides previously on how we've gone about doing that. So on the driving awareness side, it's having, in our case, Salonis Days or whatever your customer is, where you can share some of your greatest success stories or some of the value that's being driven out, or use cases, for example, to really start to build awareness internally within your organization. But what I would say is the most impactful is try to figure out how you can get executive sponsorship for whatever it is that your product helps solve. Once you have that executive sponsorship, you'll be able to target more prescriptively an end user group that could benefit from that product. So, if it's basically reselling your product internally, do that, right? To make sure you're getting in touch with the right people, the executive sponsors that can really help drive the messaging home on what the value proposition is of your product, so that you can really expand into a new user group within that organization.
That's great, thank you. So we have another question. Do you think that the changes to customer success that have happened during COVID are permanent or a temporary reaction to the situation?
I would say it's definitely, it was an awakening for many organizations, right? Customers have bought in your solution into their organizations for reasons X, Y, or Z, and all of a sudden overnight, X, Y, and Z don't matter, and A, B, and C are true. So I don't think that is going to be the new norm, right? Organizations still have larger priorities and strategies, and that's why they bring in many of our softwares into their organization. But I think it was an awakening in that it reminded us that we need to be nimble. We need to continue to look at the numbers and the data that's available to us to see whether what it is that we're trying to help organizations solve, whether that's still relevant to them, right? If it's not, if there are competing priorities, then we need to be able to stay nimble and react, stay scrappy to react to ensure that we are always addressing top matters. So I'd say it's a kind of a combo of the both, right? I don't think all of what we're facing as a result of COVID will last, but there are some best practices that you can definitely get out of this that you should take forward with you and when we do return to some level of normalcy.
And we've got time for one final question. How do you differentiate product usage from customers deriving actual value, i.e. logging in versus using the product to achieve their desired outcomes?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one thing that you can do is align on what the KPIs or metrics are around the original use case that the customer is bringing in your solution for. Once you have that, you can create a baseline of where you are today and how you're tracking over time along that metric. So that's something that we're doing quite frequently here at Solonis. But it's a good way of measuring, are you actually making improvements on the original use cases? So again, I'll use that Mary example that I use for accounts payable. A common use case for us is, are they capturing all of the discounts when they're not discounts. Are they capturing all of the discounts when they're making payments to their vendors? And so if we can track what is not being captured prior to the implementation of our software versus how much is being captured in a go-forward manner, we can see how much of it is actually being used for those use cases versus some other use cases. And I think it is important in those situations where it's being used for something else. It's clearly something that's causing the user to log in daily, right? And so getting an understanding if there's other use cases that they've found on their own that they're using the software for could also be very valuable in driving the ultimate goal, which is retention and expansion.
And I know I said that was one last question, but we do have one more for you. So what are the key characteristics and traits that you look for in a CSM?
I see that's coming from a Matt Rose, who's actually on my team. So Matt, you have the characteristics and traits I'm looking for in CSM. No, I want folks that can ultimately be the strategic advisor, right, for our customers. Again, when we were thinking about bringing in our solution into a company, there's a massive change management effort required, whether it be to replace some other solution or to change the way an organization is doing something for years, if not decades. And so folks that can be that strategic advisor, that can really, get their hands dirty, but at the same time, take a step back and think about the account as a whole and what it is that we're looking to accomplish, which ultimately is, again, driving adoption, driving value, driving retention, and ultimately positioning said account for expansion. That's what we're looking at. Someone that can bring, get their hands dirty, but also take a step back and be that strategic advisor for the customer.
That's great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the presentation and for answering the questions.
Cool. Thank you.
That's all right. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.